Welcome back to the show. Dana, cheers. Cheers to you.
I had some students of mine this week tell me they also were worshipers of Diet Coke. I felt so seen. It's such a good segue to the topic.
But was it normalizing for your love of Diet Coke?
Yes. I felt seen and like, yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, I noticed a difference between us though, which is I do like my can and you like your bottle.
I do cans when I'm doing podcasts up here in my office though, because I knock cans over when I have all this other equipment. So up here I do the bottles and downstairs I do the cans.
I see, which actually happens because I don't remember which episode it was, but Dana did knock over her bottle and all you heard in the background was psh, and I was like, oh, let's pause. Because Dana hadn't put the lid on fully.
Now
back onto her Diet Coke.
Yeah. So I have like the capped ones for traveling and when I have to worry about spillage. Yeah.
So
it's
smart.
It's a great example though. Like my wife has helped me so much with the normalizing thing. We're talking about the Olympics are on right now. And it's hard to not compare like probably to the 0.001 amount of people that can do these amazing things these people do.
Yeah.
And I was telling her about, I don't have binocular vision because I had a crossed eye when I was younger. So depth perception and then the proprioceptive issues with autism. I'm like, oh, no wonder I gravitated towards things that were like single person sports that didn't require a lot of eye-hand coordination, like bicycling and swimming and that kind of thing. And I said, she's helped me a lot when I would just knock things over or drop things because growing up, it was always, oh, Dana, be more careful. Don't move so fast. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And so not only having it normalized, like, well, people spill things. It's okay. But even as I explored and learned more about my neurology and my spatial awareness and ability, it normalized it for me. I'm like, if I'm just saying this is how my brain processes that stuff, it's different than other people's.
Yeah.
That normalizes it, right? And then there's other things that can sort of fall out from that. Like, then I have to do I need to grieve the ability that I don't have the neurology someone else has? This, that, and the other thing. But also just like, for me, the biggest thing was it alleviated a lot of shame. It's like, it doesn't matter how hard I try. Mm-hmm. It's not going to go away, right? So I can do some practicing things. Like we have this one little ball of the dogs that we do like where you throw it against the wall and it kind of comes up and you can catch it.
Yeah.
And it's just, I practiced. And then my wife's like, well, why don't you use both hands instead of one? And that never occurred to me. I'm like, oh no, I'm supposed to throw it with my right hand. I don't know. So that perceptive, or she said, or use the bigger one that's red because it's easier to see. So it did improve, but I'll never be a major leaguer, ever.
Yeah.
And so that sense of, we do a lot of that kind of work in therapy, right? And even on the podcast, we've gotten some responses back where people are like, oh, I thought it was just me. And normalizing, the word normal is derived from norm, which is really just that bell curve. And it's where the majority of people fall under that bell curve, knowing that there's a lot of people out in both other parts of the curve. And so norming is like, societal norms and things people tend to follow and cultural norms and blah, blah, blah. And if you don't fit into that, you can feel like an outlier, literally, if we're talking about the normal curve, or people have talked about felt like an alien, or I was the weird kid, or I am the weird person, or I knock things over. It doesn't matter how careful I am, all those kinds of things. In therapy, when someone comes in and says, I have this thought about something, and you say, well, that's understandable. It's just so validating, right? It's normalizing it.
Yes. Oftentimes, because I think we're also playing around with ableism, the idea and concept of ableism. Mm-hmm. And we're, because these are crossovers, right? Yeah. It's like, a lot of times you and I are saying, don't, actually, we're not comparing to norm. Don't compare, don't do that. Let's kind of lean into it, embrace it. And you've already done that already. You've already compared yourself to everybody. Such a common, whenever I speak to a young person or even a teen or a college age student who's never been diagnosed with like a learning difference or a learning disorder, this is the this is always the flag I go, oh, I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to look at this for you. It's always, I always worked harder. I always felt like I worked harder than everyone else, and I never achieved what they achieved.
Yeah.
Why has everything come so easy for everyone?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for me?
Because they're the Olympic athletes and the client isn't.
Right. You know? So it's like so interesting. And so you already have this sense where I'm different. There's something wrong with me, right? All of those shame and negative labels that we know get put onto ourselves a lot of times. Dana and I, before we hit the record button, we're talking about self-gaslighting or, when a lot of us who, have been victims of narcissism, right? It's like, the narcissist is gone, but the narrative sure isn't. The self-narrative sure isn't, right? It's still there. I think that the word validating is exactly what that is, right? It's like, you get me. Yeah. You understand me. You understand this lived experience that I've had. Yeah. And that in and of itself is just, I think, such a therapeutic and reparative moment.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the really good things about social media that in my field, it's mostly criticism, but I think that's one of the really good things that you can see other people having that experience. And we've talked about kind of like meme therapy in here. You read this meme and you're like, oh my God, that person nailed it. And when you show it to somebody else, like I'll show some of those memes to my wife and she's like, that's not funny. I'm like, right down the time. It's effing hysterical.
I don't think you said the whole thing.
Didn't say the whole thing. But that sense of like, it's validation, it's being seen, but not just being seen in a good way. You're seeing yourself without, like you were talking about all these negative layers that you've had added on top of it throughout the years, those shame messages that you got, whether it's working really hard in school and never being able to achieve what other people are achieving. Well, why is that? And can we help that? I've had so many students that have gotten accommodations and then lo and behold, all of a sudden they blossom. And sometimes they haven't even needed, like, for example, extra time on something. Knowing it's there has alleviated so much anxiety that now they can have clarity. So there's all these pieces around, but the stigma of being different is real, right? We humans tend to push out to the fringes things that are different than us. We've talked about this before too. It's one of the things that I am hopeful with younger generations is they're growing up to not do that as much in our culture. I think social media has a lot of harmful effects, sure, for an undeveloped brain, right, or developing brain. But it also has, this is generation that has said being transgender is fine, being non-binary is fine, being neurodivergent is fine. It's just who you are. Tell me about you. I want to learn about you, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you and I went to school, it really was like the Mean Girls movie. It was like these factions and you kept to yourself and you didn't interrelate and there was damage we flung arrows at each other. And not that never happens, but this sense of finding community. I found myself yesterday recommending to someone that I did an assessment on because I have so many clients that go to Reddit and subreddit because it's not identified. And people will just sort of throw out these ideas of this is how I do it. Anybody else? And people will be like, oh, hell yes, and they'll say
love
those
Reddit.
things. Yeah. In a way that, that's so much more free than even social media because your name isn't on it and you're not, that kind of thing. There's more acceptance when you're in a group like that. People are going to a Reddit page about not missing people to talk about one of our previous episodes. And they're like, oh, I don't either. What's the scoop there? We are in a position as therapists, we wield a lot of power, right? When we normalize things, or me as I I have yet to assess somebody, knock on wood, who comes to me that says, I think I might be autistic, that hasn't been yet. And it's not that I'm a bias, like looking forward. They've done all this research. They're pretty sure, but they need like that professional, put together a test battery and do it. And then it's just like, yeah, you're right. So that is that sense of validation and normalizing it for them, right? Whatever the need is. And so other people are saying, I don't need that. It's fine for me to know. Everybody's different. But we as humans tend to want to clump in the middle and have everybody be the same. And when you're able to normalize something, especially if it's an outlying thing, it's huge. It makes every bit of difference. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a power tool for a therapist to be able to reflect someone's experience so that they feel heard and understood and seen and not judged. And that sometimes it's like to say, wow, it's like, using normalization incorrectly, it can be minimizing. So
yeah.
You
everybody does that. Everybody's autistic, right? That's a minimizing.
Right. And so it's not so easy. I feel like it's this concept that we talk about a lot, but that it's actually a little bit difficult to apply and use correctly, because there's some things that we don't want to normalize, right? Because that could lead to minimalization. It can also lead to colluding.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So this is a really tricky place, but I think when it lands really surely. Like it feels right. And as therapists, when we don't know, we toss things out at people and say, I'm going to spitball this. I want to play around with this a little bit. Tell me if it hits the mark.
Yeah.
Right? It's like help me find the target for you so that I'm attentively and thoughtfully, with intention, trying to understand this thing. And I find that most of the autistics that I work with, they're very, very, it's important to use the right word.
Yeah.
Right? That they want me to use the right word. If I reflect something and it's off by a millimeter, and I'm so glad that we have this kind of relationship, they'll correct me. It's not that, Gwen. It's
they'll
this.
say,
and it's like,
it's not quite that. This is a better, right?
Yes. This example is a better example. This one better describes my experience. And it's like, wow, like that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you trust me enough to not only speak up.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to have an ego about it. Because I really desperately, deeply want to know like what that difference is.
Yeah, because I'll even ask that too and say, okay, that if I'm not sure why that word is better, I might even say, I don't want to make an assumption because that word means something to me. Tell me why that's a better word. And it really is about that getting to know you and having someone articulate it better. And that's all validating, normalizing. To me, if a human is having any experience, it's within the realm of human experience. But there are fringe things. I was talking to my class last week about all humans are capable of killing another human. And then it was like, I said, it's circumstances that have led up to that, all these things piling on top of each other. And then it's like this kindling thing. And all the right things add up, right? It's less, it's in the tails, thank God, but it still is human behavior, right? And so how do you then, and I'm thinking about, I've never worked in a prison setting, but I've supervised tons of students who do. And it becomes something like, how do I now work with this guy who's in here for 40 years for something really activating like rape? And I'm like, oh God, you've got to go to understanding that brain. What led to that? How do you feel about it now? What happened in your history that got you there? And almost always, it isn't like this person who has stayed with this mindset. It really is this mindset that gets created, and then the circumstances set up in just a way. And then if you've ever had a road rage or gotten so frustrated with something, you threw it, but it lasts a little longer, right? It's almost always something like that. And then after the fact, they're like, oh crap, mostly because they're in prison, but still, right? if you have that curious mindset, just like what is in there, rather than foreclosing on learning about that person with the judgment, that's where you get that being seen, that validating, that quote. When we say normalizing, we're not saying give permission for bad behavior. We're saying see you and have it. How does this make sense to you? What might be going on, right?
Yeah.
Now that you know you're autistic and proprioception is an issue, oh, it all makes sense. Okay, now I can like be kinder to myself, right? That's sort of what we're meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that when you understand the context of someone's thought patterns or feelings, you're like any person under those circumstances, I can understand like that's normalization, right? I can understand under those circumstances why that happened. Right?
Yeah. When you know that person, like I can tell right now that light on your hallway, and I'm assuming it's your daughter walking by, is driving you crazy, right?
Yeah.
So that sort of thing, like in my growing up, if I had something like that, I would have gotten teased about it. Oh, what's your problem? Let it go. That it's like, you don't understand how itchy that feels, right? And so to say to that person, this is something I think my wife helped me more than anybody, really. And we always say it's a Montana thing because it's like, oh, they're just like laid back and it's all good. Yeah. She'd say something like, I see that that's really bothering you. Yeah. There's nothing we can do about it right now. Or move your camera. It'll be okay. I see you in your angst. I get it. Do you need anything?
Yeah.
Right? I need to move the camera.
Go solve it. Go.
Yeah.
Let's take a moment. Yeah.
And that's like younger kids, like you're talking about when you're in those settings like school, they're not afforded that luxury.
Yeah.
Right? Teachers like, oh, I can't, it's going to be pandemonium in my class. Is it really? Right?
Yeah.
The autism level up people on Facebook, they were presenting somewhere, and one of them, there was a glitch in the technology, but she had to go in the podium thing to do something with the wires, and then it started working. And then she just stayed down there and was talking from under there. And
I love it.
It was a thing about, that's what they were there for. And they're like, here's a really good example. And she's like, this is so much nicer down here. So is it really hurting anybody? No, it's fine. People could still hear. To me, it made it more rich because it's like, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
If a kid does that and wants to sit there reading in the corner while they're foot tapping, awesome. Right. That's that validation piece. Right.
Yeah, I would agree. You brought up like supervising your supervisees in the prison in a prison kind of context. And when in my grad training, I was for a year I did juvenile hall. I did a rotation in juvenile hall and a probational boot camp. And it really put a different spin on crime for me. Yeah. And because the probationary boot camp kids, they had a very kind of, I would, for the lack of a better word, militaristic kind of level system where it was like you earned your privileges and then you could go home on the weekend if you hit a certain level. Yeah. And I saw a few things happen. One is they sabotaged their leveling up because they didn't want to go home, but that wasn't like said outright. The other is that they would eat the most amount of food I've ever seen on a Friday and eat the most amount on a Monday because they were never fed over the weekend or they were left to their own devices. But the stories that I heard, which were absolutely heartbreaking, you understand, and I understood very clearly why they did what they did and why they were there, all the way to, in juvenile hall, which was different because I did solitary confinement. I like talk about cutting your clinical chops. Yeah. Which was that a 15-year-old young man was my first day there. A 15-year-old young man was in a padded room because he was hallucinating that he was on fire. Oh, God. And I will never, ever forget my thought of, isn't like this the time where we sedate somebody? Like, just like, why are we allowing, why is this happening? And learning about undiagnosed learning differences and brain profiles in there, and not like it was just so interesting. It really just did put a different spin, and it really, in many ways, my normalization muscle was really, I think, honed in that setting.
Yeah, nothing like
and it's
someone in psychosis to really draw your attention to their brain is doing this to them. Why are we, putting them in a cage like an animal who's just been hit by a car? Why are we not helping this thing? Yeah.
It was awful. And it was, I was the first practicum student in my program to not be accepted into the program that I had originally applied for, which was a school district, was to do testing in a school district. And I did later find out that they denied me because they thought that I would advocate more for the student than the district, which, spoiler alert, I would have.
That's why my wife quit teaching first graders was because of that. Yeah.
So I got the only position that was left over, which was juvenile hall and probationary boot camp. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me clinically because it opened the depths of my soul in these vast ways of holy cow, like we are the accumulation of our experiences,
right?
So anyway,
can I say one more point?
Yes,
based on all that, to wrap it up, we're saying having things normalized, having someone see you seeing them seeing you, and you saying it's okay, it's who you are, is so reparative. I mean, you really can't underestimate that. And I think that that's, for me, what the neurodiversity movement has been. If the neurodiversity movement hadn't been happening, I probably never would know, even still, that I'm autistic. And so to have that and have that frame of things, that it's like the Rubik's Cube. Mine was constantly the wrong colors, and I finally got it all. I'm like, oh, so that in any way you can get that is unbelievably healing and sense making for your own brain. And it's a marvelous thing.
Yep. Context is everything, right? It's so helpful. And it's allowed, it's brought us here to this point of being able to have these kinds of conversations, and hoping that it resonates with someone, even one person, of just, wow, like that was really helpful for me. Like that was reparative for me. These types of conversations are supposed to open and be more expansive and embracing than anything else. So
that's right.
I'm glad we get to do it. All right, everyone. Well, be good to you. And we will see you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye, everybody.